Welcome, dear listener. You found your way to Sleepy Historian, the home of boring history for sleep. Here, stories of the distant past unfold in easy, unhurried pace, meant not to excite but to calm, not to overwhelm but to soothe. Many of you come here for bedtime relaxation and soft storytelling, and perhaps you'll find yourself drifting off as you listen to this gentle, soft spoken history documentary. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Leave a quiet note in the comments. It's strangely comforting to imagine listeners scattered across the world, lying in different rooms, in different cities, falling asleep to the same calm narration, the same unhurried rhythm of words. This evening, we turn our attention to a place and time that feels both impossibly distant and strangely familiar, the world of Mesopotamian kings. The lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave rise to some of the earliest cities, the earliest laws, and the earliest kingship. Their rulers were not only political figures, but also intermediaries between humans and the divine, guardians of temples, and keepers of rituals that stretched back into forgotten time. As we move slowly through tonight's journey, we'll linger over details of daily life in Mesopotamia, from the hum of markets to the weight of clay tablets. We'll pause to examine the life of a particular king, exploring the decisions that shaped both his reign and his people's fate. We'll wander into the realm of mystery, archaeology, and culture, unearthing the fragments of stories carved in stone and baked into clay. And we'll contrast the rhythms of ordinary households with the rarefied world of the royal court, noting how the lives of farmers and merchants intertwined, sometimes distantly, sometimes directly, with the decrees of their sovereigns. Throughout, I'll keep the pace gentle and the tone steady. You may remain fully awake, following along with curiosity, or you may let your thoughts drift, returning to the words only now and then as sleep approaches. That is the quiet beauty of relaxing history to fall asleep to. The past has no urgency. It waits patiently, unfolding in its own time. So dim the lights, let your body rest, and let your mind ease into the soft flow of history. The kings of Mesopotamia are waiting, not to dazzle or to demand, but to whisper their ancient secrets into the stillness of the night. This is history's sleep story, a calm, quiet telling for those who seek both knowledge and rest. Let the sands of time shift gently around us. Let the voices of long-forgotten scribes murmur faintly, and together, we'll step softly into the cradle of civilization. Imagine yourself stepping softly into a city that once rose from the fertile plains between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The year is unknowable, though it rests somewhere in the long stretch of Mesopotamian history, perhaps 3,000 or even 4,000 years before your own time. The city around you is neither a ruin nor a reconstruction, but living, breathing, busy with the hum of daily tasks. And yet, as you drift into the rhythm of its streets, you notice that the life unfolding here is not rushed. The pace is steady, deliberate, echoing the same unhurried flow of words you are hearing now. The air is thick with a mingling of scents. The damp sweetness of river water clings to the breeze. The faint smoke of cooking fires lingers at the edge of the marketplace. You catch a trace of fresh-baked bread, the yeast rising into the morning warmth. And beneath it all is the earthiness of clay, shaped and reshaped by countless hands into bricks, jars, tablets, and vessels. Mesopotamian cities were, in essence, built of mud and memory. Mud turned to bricks, memory pressed into wet clay with the soft wedge of a reed stylus. The streets are narrow, some shaded by the high walls of houses built closely together. Children weave between the adults, playing games that have long since vanished into obscurity. They throw knucklebones, they trace patterns in the dust, they laugh in ways that sound startlingly familiar, as if no centuries at all have passed. The rhythm of their lives is simple. Wake with the light, help with small chores, and steal whatever moments of play they can. Nearby, a merchant sets out his wares: jars of oil, baskets of dates, bolts of cloth dyed in muted tones. His stall is no grand structure, just a wooden frame draped with woven mats. But it holds the weight of trade, of exchange, of stories carried from faraway lands. A farmer approaches, offering grain in return. Words are few, gestures more than enough. The farmer's hands are rough from working the soil, his tunic plain, his sandals worn. The merchant, in contrast, carries the faint smell of foreign spices clinging to his sleeves. Two lives intersect briefly here, in a transaction that is both ordinary and vital. And then there are the scribes, the keepers of records, the guardians of numbers and names. You see one seated cross-legged at the edge of a courtyard, clay tablet on his knees, stylus in hand. He works methodically, pressing signs into the damp surface. His face is calm, almost detached, as if this act of writing is less about him and more about the continuity of the city itself. His task is not exciting. It is not thrilling, but it is necessary. Without these records, the city would lose its memory. Imagine the steady scratch of stylus on clay, repeated endlessly through the long hours of the day. As the sun climbs, the heat thickens. A woman kneels by a well, pulling up a jar of cool water, her muscles moving with practiced strength. She carries it back to her household, where another woman grinds grain on a heavy stone quern. The sound is rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, steady and repetitive. Grain, stone, flour, again and again, day after day. This is the rhythm of their lives, the unchanging cycle that underpinned everything else. Meals were simple, mostly bread, stews thick with lentils or beans, perhaps flavored with garlic or onions. Meat was rare, reserved for festivals or wealthier households. Yet in their simplicity, these meals carried the comfort of familiarity. Temple bells ring faintly in the distance. They call not for worship in the sense you may know it, but for ritual, for duty, for acknowledgement of forces larger than human will. The temples are the tallest buildings in the city, rising like stairways to the heavens. They remind every passerby that life is not only about trade and labor, but also about the unseen, gods who shaped the floods, who measured out the harvests, who whispered in the winds. Daily life is never fully separated from the divine. As evening falls, shadows lengthen, and the streets soften into quiet. Families gather on rooftops, where the breeze is cooler. They share food. They speak in low voices. They look up at the vast spread of stars. Those stars are bright, countless, unpolluted by modern light. Children drift into sleep under that sky, their dreams wrapped in the gentle hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. Adults linger a little longer, gazing at constellations that seem to them not distant but immediate, patterns drawn by gods, signs meant to guide kings and commoners alike. The rhythm of Mesopotamian life is steady, unhurried, bound to the cycles of sun and river. It is not a life of constant novelty or excitement, but one of repetition, familiarity, and ritual. Imagine yourself here, lying on a rooftop, the clay still warm beneath your back, the stars endless above you, the city breathing softly all around. It is easy, in this moment, to let go of the present and drift into the quiet of the past. As the days of Mesopotamia unfold, we can look closer at the patterns that sustained life. Imagine walking through one of the city gates at dawn. The world is just beginning to stir. The faint light of the rising sun touches the mud brick walls, turning them a soft gold. The sound of footsteps echoes on the packed earth. Traders lead donkeys loaded with baskets. Farmers arrive with fresh produce. Guards yawn at their posts, leaning against spears worn smooth from constant use. Inside the city, the layout is both planned and chaotic. Streets twist and turn, some ending abruptly, others leading to open courtyards. Houses rise in uneven rows, most made from the same humble material, mud brick dried in the sun. This choice of building material may seem fragile, yet it allowed families to construct and rebuild with relative ease. Over centuries, layers of mud brick created not only individual homes, but entire mounds upon which cities stood. Each generation quite literally built upon the past. Step inside one of these homes. The air is cool, shaded by thick walls. A central courtyard admits light and air. Around are small rooms, sparsely furnished. A low bed woven from reeds, a chest for storage, jars of grain, pitchers of water. In one corner, a small shrine holds a clay figurine or an offering bowl, a private reminder of devotion, separate from the grandeur of temple rituals. The household is simple, yet it is enough. The rhythm of domestic life flows quietly here, sweeping floors, tending fires, preparing food, repairing tools. The division of labor is steady, predictable. Men often work in the fields, tending barley, wheat, or date palms. Others take up crafts, pottery, weaving, metalwork. Women manage the home, though they too might engage in trade, weaving cloth to sell, or brewing beer in clay vats for the household and market. Beer was not a luxury, but a staple, consumed daily in place of unsafe water. Thick, cloudy, nutritious, and slightly sour, it was drunk through straws from communal jars. Imagine the soft murmur of conversation around such a jar, the slow pace of life marked not by urgency, but by steady, shared routines. Children are ever present, small shadows following adults, absorbing skills they will need. A boy watches his father mend a net, tying knots with patient precision. A girl sits beside her mother, learning to spin wool on a simple spindle. There is no rush to their education. Skills pass quietly, woven into daily tasks, until the motions become as natural as breathing. Childhood is short, but never wasted. The city also carries the steady pulse of specialized work. The potter shapes clay on a simple wheel, spinning slowly with one hand, forming vessels that will carry water, oil, or grain. The weaver works a loom, her hands moving in repetitive patterns, thread over thread, hour after hour. These tasks are not glamorous, yet they're the backbone of society. Every jar, every cloth, every tool is the product of such slow, careful labor. The rhythm of their lives is not measured in years, but in repeated actions, hands pressing, shaping, tying, spinning, weaving. And always there is sound. Dogs barking at the edge of the streets. The bray of donkeys burdened with heavy loads. The creak of wooden carts. The murmur of bargaining voices in the market. At night, the sounds soften. Crickets hum. Distant flutes or drums drift from a festival or gathering. The city rests, yet never falls completely silent. Festivals punctuate this quiet rhythm. On certain days, the streets swell with music and processions. Priests lead chants in honor of the gods, while offerings are brought forward: bread, dates, lambs. These festivals are not spectacles for entertainment alone. They are moments of reassurance. The people gather to affirm their place in the order of the world, to trust once again that the gods watch, that the king leads, that the rivers will flow as they always have. In these moments, the city feels united, bound by ritual and repetition. As the festival ends, life returns to its quieter pace. Merchants close their stalls. Farmers return to the fields. Children drift to sleep, lulled by the same familiar lullabies sung for generations. And above it all, the stars turn slowly, marking the passage of time in their steady, unchanging rhythm. The people of Mesopotamia knew little of distant lands, yet they knew the stars well. They charted their courses, traced their patterns, and found meaning in their endless repetition. Imagine lying in that world now. The smell of clay lamps burning oil. The softness of woven mats beneath you. The muffled sounds of neighbors speaking across rooftops. The city breathes with you, its rhythm matching your own. Time stretches, unhurried, patient. The daily life of Mesopotamia continues, as steady and soothing as the gentle flow of the river nearby. As you wander further through the city, you begin to notice how deeply the cycles of life are tied to both the land and the heavens. Mesopotamia was called the cradle of civilization, but cradle also implies a rocking rhythm, gentle and repetitive, steady, and predictable. That rhythm is found everywhere. In the rising of the rivers, in the labor of the fields, in the rituals of temples, and in the quiet routines of households. The fields outside the city walls stretch wide, reaching toward the horizon. Farmers rise early before the heat presses down to tend the barley and wheat. They walk between furrows dug by hand or plow, guiding oxen slowly, carefully. Irrigation canals bring water from the rivers, yet they require constant attention. A canal can dry too quickly or flood too suddenly, and the harvest depends on a balance that is never fully secure. Day after day, farmers open and close small channels with nothing more than reeds, clay, and patience. The rhythm of their lives is not dramatic. It is measured in the steady growth of crops, the slow filling of granaries, the endless repetition of planting and harvesting. When the midday sun burns hot, workers pause in the shade of trees or mud brick walls. Bread is eaten with onions or dates, washed down with beer. Conversation is simple. The health of the animals, the condition of the fields, the promises of the next harvest. Nothing is rushed, nothing is loud. Time is measured less in hours and more in tasks. Watering, feeding, repairing. By late afternoon, they return again to their fields, and the same patterns continue until darkness draws them back to their homes. Inside the city, life is just as steady. Artisans sit in open workshops, their hands skilled, but their movements unhurried. The blacksmith hammers bronze, the blows regular, like the heartbeat of labor. The carpenter carves wood into tools and furniture, his shavings curling slowly onto the floor. The baker kneads dough, presses it into clay molds, and slides it into ovens fueled by reeds and wood. The repetition is almost meditative: press, fold, bake, repeat. Yet daily life was not without its challenges. Illness was ever present, though understood differently than today. A fever might be seen as the touch of a god or a spirit. Remedies mixed herbs, oils, and incantations, offered with quiet hope rather than certainty. Death was close, familiar, and accepted as part of life cycle. Graves were dug near houses, ancestors remembered through small rituals. Even in loss, the rhythm of life continued. Rituals tied to the gods brought comfort. In the evenings, you might hear chants drifting from a temple courtyard. Priests recite hymns preserved for centuries, their voices slow and deliberate, each word measured. Offerings of bread, beer, or incense are placed before statues, not because the gods needed them, but because the people needed to give them. It was a way to maintain balance, to acknowledge forces beyond their control. Imagine the low hum of chanting, the flicker of oil lamps, the faint smell of incense drifting into the night air. The effect is not exciting, but steadying, like a lullaby sung across centuries. At times, the city faced disruptions. Floods swept through streets. Drought cracked the earth. Rumors of conflict carried unease. Yet even then, the people adapted. Walls were repaired, canals restored, homes rebuilt. The details of suffering are lost to time. Yet what remains clear is the persistence of daily life. No matter the challenge, people rose with the sun, baked their bread, tended their fields, offered prayers, and lay down to sleep once more beneath the stars. Even recreation carried the same quiet tone. Board games carved into stone surfaces played with small counters. Music performed on lyres or flutes, soft and winding, more to accompany an evening than to command it. Storytelling by lamplight, voices low, repeating tales of heroes and gods that everyone already knew. The repetition was not dull, but comforting. Each retelling strengthened the connection between past and present, between parents and children, between humans and the gods. Night falls again. The streets grow still, torches flicker at the gates, and rooftops fill with quiet voices. Some families sit together, speaking softly of their day. Others already drift into rest, lulled by the warmth of clay beneath them and the cool touch of the night breeze. The stars continue their ancient patterns, just as they always have. As you linger in this moment, Imagine the steady beat of Mesopotamian life. Work, ritual, rest, repeated endlessly. It is not dramatic, not thrilling, but it is deeply human. And in its very ordinariness, it becomes soothing, a rhythm that can carry you gently towards sleep. The lives of these ancient people, though distant, echo faintly in your own. The need for food, for shelter, for meaning, for rest. The cradle of civilization was also a cradle of repetition, rocking gently across centuries, inviting you now to close your eyes and drift into its steady embrace. The kings of Mesopotamia lived at the meeting point of myth and reality. Their reigns were chronicled in lists and inscriptions, in clay tablets carefully pressed with wedge-shaped signs. Yet those records mixed the ordinary with the extraordinary, blending years of practical rule with whispers of divine favor. Among the earliest and most enduring names is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. Though time has turned him into legend, there are hints of a real ruler beneath the stories. Tonight, we will walk slowly through his shadow, not chasing the heroic feats of epic poetry, but pausing on the details that might reveal the man, the king, and the rhythm of his reign. Imagine the city of Uruk during his time. Towering walls, said to stretch for miles, surrounded the settlement. These walls were more than defense. They were symbols of permanence. In a world where floods could sweep away villages overnight, the walls of Uruk declared stability. To build them required immense labor. Thousands of hands shaping mud into bricks, drying them in the sun, stacking them layer by layer. Gilgamesh is remembered as the king who commanded these works. Yet the true story lies in the countless men and women who carried baskets of clay on their shoulders day after day under the heat of Mesopotamian skies. The legend tells us Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a ruler both close to the gods and bound to human needs. But imagine instead the daily duties of kingship. He would have presided over the distribution of land, ensuring that fields near irrigation canals were assigned fairly, or at least in a way that maintained order. He would have judged disputes, listening to petitions brought by farmers, merchants, and priests. His court would not have been a place of grandeur alone, but also of endless repetition, scroll after scroll, tablet after tablet, with complaints, requests, and decrees. His presence in ritual was just as important as his role in law. Kings were mediators between humans and gods. At great festivals, Gilgamesh would have processed through the city, accompanied by priests, musicians, and offerings. Incense would rise, chants would echo, and the king's very body symbolized the bond between the divine and the mortal. To the people, his strength was not only measured by conquest, but also by his ability to keep the gods content, the rivers flowing, and the harvest secure. Yet legends also whisper of his arrogance, of his tendency to take what he wished, to rule with a heavy hand. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of the people crying out to the gods for relief. Whether this was truth or literary invention, it reflects a common tension. Kingship brought both order and burden. To be ruled was to be protected, but also to be subjected to the will of one man. Imagine the quiet conversations of commoners, spoken in low voices at night on rooftops, wondering if the king heard their pleas or if he cared. The arrival of Enkidu in the epic represents a balance, an untamed figure who became both friend and check upon the king's pride. But if we strip away the poetry, what remains is the suggestion that even kings needed companions. Even rulers needed someone to remind them of their humanity. Beneath the stone inscriptions and heroic lines, Gilgamesh may have laughed, may have tired, may have worried about his legacy. He was not merely a figure carved in myth, but a man who lived, breathed, and eventually, like all others, faced death. The great journey of Gilgamesh in the epic is his search for immortality. But in reality, the immortality he found was not in escaping death, but in being remembered. His walls, his temples, his name pressed into clay, these endured long after his body returned to the earth. And perhaps that was the point. For kings of Mesopotamia, the rhythm of their reign was not only about surviving their years. but about leaving structures and stories that would outlast them. So imagine Uruk at dusk. The king stands upon the wall, looking out at the river glinting in the fading light. Farmers return from the fields. Merchants close their stalls. Priests prepare evening offerings. The city hums with life, steady and predictable, and yet, at its center, a single man carries the weight of its order. Whether arrogant or just, whether divine or flawed, Gilgamesh embodied what it meant to be king in Mesopotamia, a man caught between the needs of the people and the demands of the gods, between the fleeting span of human life and the longing for permanence. The epic ends with a reminder. If you want to know Gilgamesh, look at the walls of Uruk. They stand as his true legacy, more enduring than his deeds. And so, as you rest in the gentle flow of history tonight, consider how the rhythm of daily life and the rhythm of kingship were woven together, each sustaining the other, each leaving traces for us to follow thousands of years later. When we think of kingship in Mesopotamia, it is easy to imagine power, grandeur, and command. Yet much of a king's reign was marked by repetition, by responsibilities that demanded constant attention rather than sudden triumphs. To rule was not to live in luxury alone, but to become the axis upon which the cycles of society turned. Consider the court of a king, such as Hammurabi of Babylon, remembered today for the code of laws that bore his name. His court was not merely a place of gold and decoration, but also a space of work. Day after day, petitioners arrived, farmers disputing boundaries, merchants quarreling over contracts, families seeking judgments about inheritance. Each case required hearing, recording, deciding. Imagine the endless stream of voices, the scratch of stylus on clay as scribes noted down the decisions. The king's role was to maintain balance, to offer justice that reassured his people and reaffirmed his authority. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a tall stone stele, is often remembered for its severity. An eye for an eye has echoed through time. Yet when read closely, it reveals more about the rhythm of life than about harsh punishment. Laws about irrigation, about oxen, about debts and wages. They reflect a world where daily survival depended upon shared agreements, upon fairness enforced from above. The king was the guarantor of order. Without him, canals would be neglected, disputes would fester, and the fragile balance of city life might collapse. But kingship extended beyond the courtroom. Hammurabi, like many rulers, was deeply involved in building projects. Temples rose under his command. Canals were dug or repaired. Walls were strengthened. These tasks did not happen once, but continually. A canal, once dug, needed clearing again and again. A temple required endless offerings, repairs, rituals. The rhythm of kingship matched the rhythm of the city, never complete, always repeating. In the temples, the king's presence was symbolic. He might not personally place every offering, yet festivals could not proceed without his role. At the New Year festival, for example, the king was ritually humbled before the statue of the chief god, Marduk. His crown was removed, his power symbolically stripped away, only to be returned again as a sign of divine approval. This ritual reaffirmed not just the god's place above men, but also the king's place between gods and people. The repetition of this festival, year after year, was as important as any military campaign. Military affairs were another responsibility, though again, less glamorous than we might imagine. Campaigns were often seasonal, timed around the harvest so that soldiers could also tend their fields. Victories might be won, but even in war, logistics ruled, feeding the army, supplying water, moving animals and equipment across rough terrain. A king might lead with bravery, but he also had to think of the endless supplies of barley, the building of camps, the digging of ditches. The rhythm of kingship was as much about planning as about fighting. The king's household mirrored his city. Within palace walls, there were officials, scribes, servants, guards. Food had to be prepared daily for hundreds, if not thousands. Storage rooms filled with grain, oil, and wine were carefully inventoried. Each servant's task was set, repeated, unchanging. The palace was not only a symbol of power, but a machine of routine. The king himself, though elevated, lived within this web of repetition. His meals, his audiences, his rituals. Each day was structured, steady, and deliberate. At night, when the city quieted and the palace walls stood dark, one wonders what weighed on a king's mind. Did he listen to the distant murmur of the river, thinking of floods and canals? Did he consider the fairness of his judgments, or fear rebellion from those dissatisfied? Did he, like any man, worry about the health of his children or the fragility of his legacy? The tablets do not record his private thoughts, but it is easy to imagine the humanness of his concerns. For even a king, life was finite and order fragile. The reign of Hammurabi is remembered today not because he conquered lands far and wide, but because he inscribed his order into stone. His laws, his justice, his vision of balance, these outlived him. In this sense, kingship was never about single moments of glory, but about the steady shaping of a society, day by day, judgment by judgment, law by law. And so, as you listen, picture the king not as a distant figure of might, but as a man immersed in the rhythm of responsibility. He is surrounded by scribes, listening to disputes. He is inspecting a canal, standing in the hot sun as workers shovel clay. He is sitting in ritual, head bowed before the statue of a god, awaiting the return of his crown. He is lying awake at night, staring into the darkness, thinking of tomorrow. The rhythm of his life, though elevated, was still a rhythm of repetition, much like your own. The reign of a Mesopotamian king was always balanced between glory and fragility. Though power seemed absolute, it rested on foundations that could shift with each season, each harvest, each omen in the stars. Kingship was never secure. It was a burden as much as a privilege, a weight carried from dawn to dusk, year to year. Imagine the king waking in the early morning. Servants would bring food, water, a ceremonial clothing. Advisors would gather, awaiting instructions. Already, the burdens began. A bad harvest in one province, unrest in another, requests from priests for temple repairs, merchants complaining about taxes. All these matters piled upon him before the day truly began. His words, carefully spoken, could ease tensions or inflame them. The wrong judgment could linger, whispered among citizens, carried by merchants, noted on clay tablets that survived beyond his lifetime. Omens weighed heavily on a ruler's mind. The night sky was read with great care. An eclipse was not simply an astronomical event. It was a sign, a whisper from the divine. Priests studied the stars, sacrificed animals, examined livers for patterns that might reveal a god's intention. A king lived under this constant watch of the heavens. If the stars foretold danger, the king might appoint a substitute ruler, a commoner who would wear the crown temporarily, absorbing divine wrath, before being quietly removed. The true king would step back into place once the ill fortune had passed. Such rituals reveal the delicate edge upon which kingship balanced, where even the sky could threaten a throne. Beyond omens, there were human dangers. Rivals within the court, jealous relatives, ambitious generals, all could become threats. Palaces, though fortified, were filled with whispers. Trust was rare. A king might dine with men he feared, accept offerings from men he suspected, and rely on guards he hoped were loyal. This tension, never fully resolved, formed part of the daily burden. Despite these dangers, kings aspired to legacy. To build was to endure. Temples, walls, canals, and palaces were constructed to project permanence. Yet time eroded even stone. Walls cracked, canals silted, palaces burned. What remained more often than not were tablets, fragments of administrative accounts, copies of royal decrees, lists of supplies. Kings dreamed of glory sung for generations, but what survived might only be a note about barley rations or a record of bricks ordered for a temple. In this way, their grand ambitions were reduced to quiet echoes in clay. Some kings succeeded in leaving clearer marks. Hammurabi's laws, as we have seen, carved into basalt, endured. The inscriptions of Sargon of Akkad, boasting of conquests, were copied centuries after his death. Yet even these records were reframed by later rulers, each seeking to link themselves to the past while surpassing it. Kingship, then, was not only burdened by the present, but also by the weight of history itself. Every ruler compared himself to those before, judged by the same measures of conquest, construction, and justice. The fragility of kingship is most apparent in the stories of collapse. An empire could crumble within a generation. Floods might overwhelm canals, leaving fields barren. Armies of neighboring peoples could sweep across borders, plundering cities, carrying away idols of the gods. Once the gods themselves were taken, a city's spirit seemed broken. For the king, such events marked not just personal failure, but the undoing of divine favor. His reign, once blessed, was now condemned. In such times, kings disappeared from records, replaced by invaders or forgotten entirely. Their legacies dissolved into silence. And yet, despite this fragility, there is something enduring in the idea of Mesopotamian kingship. The very rhythm of their lives, the burdens they carried, the constant balancing between divine will and human demand. These themes have echoed across centuries. When we look back, we do not see perfect rulers, nor invincible conquerors, but men enmeshed in the same uncertainties that mark all human lives. The difference lay only in scale. Their choices rippled across thousands. Their mistakes toppled cities. Their achievements shaped civilizations. For the listener today, drifting in the quiet hours of night, this story of kingship may feel strangely intimate. A king, awake at night, staring into the dark, worrying over canals or conspiracies, was not so different from you lying in your room, turning over worries of your own. The rhythm of care, the burden of responsibility, the fragility of tomorrow. These connect us to lives lived 4,000 years ago. And so, the reign of a Mesopotamian king, remembered in fragments of stone and clay, speaks not only of power, but also of weight. It is the story of glory shadowed by fragility, of dreams worn thin by time, of legacies carried forward not in grandeur, but in echoes. The burden of kingship was heavy, and yet it was borne again and again, as each ruler stepped forward to wear the crown, to carry the weight, to meet the dawn with uncertainty. As we move deeper into Mesopotamian history, the quiet mysteries of their myths and temples invite us to pause and linger. To understand these stories is to step into a world where the boundary between human life and divine presence was fragile, where every stone laid in a temple, every word carved on a tablet, carried echoes of eternity. In the heart of cities such as Uruk, Babylon, and Nippur rose towering temples known as ziggurats. Their layered steps climbed toward the heavens. Vast platforms of baked brick built by human hands, yet intended as stairways for the gods. At their base, priests conducted rituals. Offerings were brought. Incense burned. Chants rose into the air. Imagine the slow ascent of smoke, curling upward, vanishing into the blue sky above the city. For the people watching from the streets, that rising smoke was a bridge, a visible sign that their prayers might be carried upward. Inside the sanctuaries, the air was heavy with quiet. Statues of gods, carefully carved and richly adorned, stood at the center of devotion. To Mesopotamians, these statues were not mere symbols. They were the gods themselves, dwelling within stone or wood when properly honored. Each morning, priests performed a ritual known as washing the mouth. They bathed the statue, clothed it, offered food and drink. These acts were not gestures of imagination, but necessities as real to them as feeding a guest at a table. If the statue was neglected, the god might abandon it, leaving the people unprotected. The myths woven around these gods told of creation, conflict, and fate. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, spoke of a world born from the chaos of mingled waters. From that chaos rose gods who quarreled and battled, until Marduk, the champion, split the body of Tiamat, the primordial sea dragon, and from her remains fashioned the heavens and the earth. For Mesopotamians, this was not just a story. It explained why order was fragile, why the world seemed forever balanced between stability and chaos. Their own lives, full of floods, wars, and uncertainties, mirrored this cosmic struggle. Other myths carried quieter mysteries. In the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld, the goddess of love and war stripped away her garments and powers as she journeyed below, until she stood naked and powerless before her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Only through cunning and sacrifice did she return to the living. For listeners then and now, the tale is haunting. It reflects the cycles of fertility, the barrenness of winter, the fragile line between life and death. Imagine farmers hearing this myth as fields lay fallow, trusting that like Inanna, life would return. The ruins of these temples tell us much, though always in fragments. Archaeologists uncover foundations, fragments of statues, bits of inscriptions. The great ziggurat of Uar, for example, still rises, though weathered and incomplete. Standing before it today, one sees brick upon brick, layer upon layer, a monument not to divine permanence, but to human effort. The gods may have once walked its stairs, or so people believed, but now only the wind moves across its surfaces, carrying whispers of forgotten prayers. What is striking in these myths and temples is not their strangeness, but their familiarity. The longing for order, the reverence for forces beyond human control, the telling of stories to explain the unknown. These are not unique to Mesopotamia. They are part of being human. When you hear of Inanna descending into darkness, or of Marduk bringing order from chaos, you may find echoes of stories told across countless cultures. The details differ, but the rhythm is the same: struggle, fragility, renewal. In the quiet of night, these myths can be soothing. They unfold at a pace outside of urgency, like waves on a shore. Each telling is the same, and yet each telling is new. For Mesopotamians, repeating the myths was not just tradition, but necessity. Recited at festivals, carved into tablets, whispered in sanctuaries, they renewed the world each time. For you listening now, they may renew a different kind of order, a rhythm of calm, a slowing of thought, a reminder of continuity. And so, picture the ziggurat under starlight. Imagine priests tending to a statue, washing its face with careful hands. Picture farmers gathering for a festival, listening to the chant of the Enuma Elish, hearing again how the world was shaped. The air is thick with incense. The crowd murmurs softly. The drums beat slowly. The gods seem near, and yet, like sleep itself, they remain just beyond reach, felt more than seen, trusted more than understood. The mysteries of Mesopotamian myths and temples remain unsolved in many ways. Archaeologists continue to uncover fragments. Scholars continue to translate tablets. But what lingers most is not the detail of a line or the measure of a wall. It is the sense of longing, the echo of belief, the rhythm of devotion that connects those distant lives to your own quiet listening now. To live in Mesopotamia was to live in a world thick with signs. Every sound, every shadow, every shift in the river's flow seemed to whisper of the divine. Rituals and omens wove themselves into the fabric of daily life, steadying people against uncertainty. For the king, for the farmer, for the scribe, the unseen world of the gods was never distant. It pressed close, shaping choices and giving meaning to events. One of the most striking features of Mesopotamian belief was the art of divination. Priests and specialists, known as Baru, sought to read the intentions of the gods in the most ordinary or extraordinary of places. The sky, first of all, was a vast canvas of messages. Eclipses were dreaded warnings. The movement of planets and stars was charted with obsessive care. Each variation, each unusual alignment, carried possible outcomes: famine, victory, rebellion, prosperity. Imagine a priest standing on a roof of a temple, eyes lifted to the night sky, carefully sketching positions onto clay tablets, whispering predictions into the dark. Another form of divination, perhaps the most curious to modern minds, was the reading of animal livers. In great rituals, sheep were sacrificed and their organs examined for markings and shapes. The liver, seen as the seat of life, became a kind of map, revealing the will of the gods. Scribes created clay models of these livers, inscribing sections with notes about what each sign might mean. To us, it may seem strange, yet to them, it was a meticulous science rooted in centuries of observation and belief. The liver was as much a book as any tablet. Beyond omens, there were rituals to maintain balance. Each day in temples, statues of gods were bathed, clothed, and fed, not as symbols but as honored presences. Each festival, carefully timed to agricultural or astronomical cycles, renewed the bond between people and divine. Music, drums, chanting, offerings, these sounds and movements were familiar, repeated endlessly, each repetition reassuring, each performance a thread tying people to order. Ordinary people also carried rituals into their homes. Small clay figurines, buried beneath thresholds or placed in corners, served as guardians. Amulets were worn to ward off evil spirits. Incantations were whispered against illness, against nightmares, against harm. Daily life was never without these quiet protections. To live without them would have felt exposed, vulnerable. Among the most fascinating glimpses into this world are the incantation bowls found in Mesopotamian houses. Simple clay bowls inscribed with spiraling texts. Their words invoke protection against demons or misfortune. Placed upside down and buried, they acted as traps, binding harmful forces. Today, archaeologists recover them, reading the spirals like echoes of whispered prayers. Imagine a family gathering quietly as a priest inscribed such a bowl, their hopes and fears hidden in those winding lines. The boundaries between ritual, myth, and daily life were porous. A storm could be interpreted as a divine warning, and in response, a household might burn incense or recite protective words. A birth might call for amulets, a marriage for blessings, a death for rituals to guide the spirit. In all these acts, the rhythm of repetition calmed the fears of unpredictability. For kings and rulers, rituals became state matters. The Akitu festival, held at the new year, was a grand renewal of cosmic order. In this ritual, as we mentioned earlier, the king was humbled before the statue of Marduk, stripped of symbols, struck across the face by a priest. If tears came, it was seen as a sign that the gods still favored him. Afterwards, his crown and staff were restored, his power re-sanctioned. Imagine the tension of that moment, when all eyes in Babylon looked to see whether the king's tears would fall. The fate of the city, in their view, rested in that ritual act. To modern eyes, these rituals and omens may seem mysterious or even quaint, yet they reflect a profound human need to find order in uncertainty, to create rhythm against chaos. Whether through the careful reading of stars, the inscription of protective bowls, or the repetition of chants, Mesopotamians anchored themselves against the unknown. In their world, where rivers could flood, crops could fail, armies could attack, these rituals offered a sense of control, a way to believe that chaos could be managed. As you listen, let yourself imagine the steady patterns of these rituals. Picture the night sky over Babylon, stars pricked against the velvet dark, priests tracing their paths with reed stylus on clay. Picture a family in their home, whispering over a clay bowl as the final lines are inscribed. Picture the king in the temple, humbled and then restored, his power bound again to the will of gods. These rhythms, repeated year after year, generation after generation, lulled people into continuity, much as the rhythms of storytelling may now lull you into sleep. The ruins of Mesopotamia, scattered across deserts and plains, tell stories not only of what was built, but also of what was lost. Temples once central to city life now lie in fragments, their walls reduced to mounds of earth and brick. Knowledge once carefully inscribed has vanished, leaving silence where voices once filled the air. To reflect on these losses is to wander through a landscape of mystery, where absence itself becomes part of history. In the city of Uruk, where writing was first shaped on clay, once stood the temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war. For centuries, it was tended with devotion, offerings made, rituals repeated. Today, its remains are uneven mounds, with scattered bricks bearing traces of ancient hands. Archaeologists sift through layers of soil, uncovering foundations, small figurines, fragments of inscriptions. The grandeur imagined by ancient poets has long faded, yet in the stillness of the site one feels the weight of time. The temple is gone, but the idea of its presence lingers like a shadow. The same is true in Nippur, the religious center of Mesopotamia. Here stood the temple of Enlil, chief of the gods. Kings from across the region traveled to Nippur to seek divine legitimacy. Without the blessing of Enlil, their rule felt incomplete. Yet the temple itself, once vast, was plundered and neglected until little remained. When archaeologists uncovered it in the late 19th century, they found not towering walls, but clay tablets buried in heaps, administrative notes, hymns, and fragments of literature. The voice of Enlil had fallen silent, yet the records of scribes survived, almost as if the hum of bureaucracy outlasted the roar of divinity. One of the enduring mysteries of Mesopotamia is how much knowledge has simply disappeared. Clay tablets, when baked or preserved in dry conditions, survived for thousands of years. But many were washed away by floods, shattered in conquest, or crumbled back into dust. Scholars estimate that we have only a small fraction of what was once written. Whole libraries have been lost. Imagine shelves of tablets filled with stories, laws, astronomical notes, medical recipes, all gone. What survives are fragments, like pieces of a puzzle with most missing. Among the most haunting examples is the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. Although later than many Mesopotamian temples, it preserved texts from earlier times. Thousands of tablets were collected there, covering topics from epic tales to incantations. Yet even this library, vast as it was, is incomplete. Gaps remain in stories we know are longer. Lines break off mid-thought. It is as if voices speak from across millennia, then fade suddenly into silence. The gaps themselves become part of the mystery. The ruins of ziggurats also tell of forgotten grandeur. The ziggurat of Uar, still partly standing, once rose high above the plains. Its steps were broad, its walls decorated, its summit crowned with a shrine. Today, much has eroded, though restorations give a sense of its form. To stand near it is to feel both awe and melancholy. You see what remains and imagine what has been lost. The air is dry, the bricks weathered, the silence deep. The voices of priests, the sound of drums, the scent of incense, all are gone. What lingers is only an outline, a ghost of stone. These forgotten temples remind us of the fragility of human creation. For those who built them, the walls seemed permanent, the rituals eternal. For us, they are fragments to be studied, sites to be photographed, mysteries to be interpreted. Yet perhaps the true legacy of these temples lies not in their endurance, but in their rhythm. For centuries, people returned to them, day after day, festival after festival. They were places of repetition, of familiarity, of comfort. When they fell silent, the rhythm stopped, but its memory echoes faintly even now. There is also mystery in what lies still buried. Archaeologists know that beneath layers of soil, countless temples remain unseen. Floods and shifting rivers have hidden them. Cities have built over them. Each excavation uncovers more, but each discovery hints at more still concealed. It is a reminder that history is not complete, that silence holds as much weight as what is found. The forgotten temples of Mesopotamia are not only ruins, they are promises of stories yet untold. For the listener, this is a gentle reminder of impermanence. What is built fades. What is written may be lost. What seems lasting proves fragile. And yet, in the act of remembering, of retelling, of imagining, the past stirs again. To speak of these forgotten temples is to let them rise once more in the quiet of the mind. Their steps, their walls, their statues return for a moment, built not of brick but of thought. Like sleep itself, they hover between presence and absence, between solidity and dream. In a layered society of Mesopotamia, not everyone lived the same kind of life. While many tilled fields, wove cloth, or shaped clay into vessels, others walked in the shadow of temples and palaces. These were the nobles, the priests, and the administrators, figures whose lives unfolded in spacious courtyards and echoing halls, rather than in crowded workshops or dusty streets. Their presence was not only visible in their wealth, but also in the rituals and authority that gave structure to the lives of others. The priesthood occupied a place of unusual prominence. In temples dedicated to gods, such as Enlil, Inanna, or Marduk, priests were the intermediaries between mortals and the divine. Their responsibilities extended far beyond ceremonies. They oversaw the temple lands, managed offerings, recorded inventories, and even administered justice in certain cases. A priest might rise before dawn to oversee rituals of purification, to ensure that incense was burned at the right hour, or that bread was laid upon the altar exactly as tradition demanded. The rhythm of their days was shaped less by seasons of harvest and more by the calendar of festivals, eclipses, and celestial omens. For those who stood outside these circles, the world of the priest might seem almost otherworldly. While farmers' hands were marked by calluses, the priest's hand carried the stylus, etching words into clay. While shepherds followed flocks under the sun, the priest traced the movement of planets across the night sky. The priesthood embodied both learning and mystery. Their knowledge of writing, of ritual, of astronomy gave them influence beyond their numbers. It was said that the gods spoke through them, but it was equally true that their words shaped the will of the gods in human affairs. Nobles, by contrast, lived lives defined by status, land, and proximity to kingship. A noble's household was often large, with servants, scribes, and attendants. They held estates worked by tenant farmers or laborers, producing grain, dates, and wool that added to their wealth. Nobles might be military leaders, commanding soldiers in campaigns, or administrators, ensuring that taxes flowed properly to the palace. Their clothing reflected their station: fine wool garments, jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, carefully groomed beards. Where common folk lived in mud brick houses clustered in narrow lanes, nobles inhabited residences with courtyards, shaded colonnades, and decorated walls. The palace itself was the ultimate stage for noble life. Within its walls, decisions were made that shaped entire regions. The palace was both administrative hub and symbol of authority. Its storerooms overflowed with goods, grain piled in baskets, oil stored in jars, livestock counted and penned. Nobles dined in feasts where music played softly, where cups of beer or wine were raised, and where alliances were formed through conversation. Yet even in these settings, hierarchy was strict. Seating arrangements, the quality of food served, and the right to speak before others all reflected rank. For the ordinary citizen, the noble class might seem distant, even unreachable. But in festivals, when kings and nobles appeared in public, the line between elite and commoner became briefly visible. Crowds gathered to watch processions where nobles walked alongside priests, carrying offerings or gifts for the gods. The contrast was striking. Fine garments beside simple tunics, gilded jewelry beside bare hands. For a moment, all eyes saw the social order displayed as spectacle. The authority of priests and nobles was not merely material, but deeply symbolic. Priests claimed divine insight. Nobles embodied the strength of lineage and power. Together, they formed a partnership that stabilized Mesopotamian life. A king might rule, but he required priests to sanction his authority and nobles to enforce his decrees. The fabric of society was woven from these threads of ritual, lineage, and obligation. Yet even within these ranks, lives were not without fragility. Temples and palaces might fall in conquest. Nobles might lose favor, and priests might see their gods questioned. Wealth could be plundered, status stripped, legacies erased. Archaeologists uncover grand residences, but they also uncover signs of abandonment, shattered vessels, unfinished texts, forgotten altars. Just as the humblest farmer's hut might vanish with time, so too the halls of the mighty could crumble. What lingers is a picture both imposing and delicate. Priests gazing at the stars, whispering omens to kings. Nobles in shaded courtyards, dictating orders to scribes. Servants rushing across tiled floors with trays of food and drink. Musicians playing softly in the background, their melodies now vanished into the silence of history. These glimpses remind us that behind the walls of power were still human lives, with their own routines, anxieties, and fleeting joys. For the modern listener, drifting toward rest, the contrast between commoner and elite becomes part of the dreamscape. On one side, the steady rhythm of labor in fields and workshops. On the other, the measured pace of ritual and courtly life. Two worlds, intertwined yet distinct, each essential to the great tapestry of Mesopotamian civilization. As sleep approaches, these contrasts soften into harmony, a reminder that history, like dreams, is made from many voices. When we step into the households of Mesopotamia, beyond the grand palaces and towering temples, we encounter the more intimate sphere of family life. Here, in mud brick homes shaded from the desert sun, the rhythm of daily existence unfolded. For women and families, life was shaped by both tradition and necessity, filled with tasks that were essential for survival and continuity, yet often overlooked in official records. Women in Mesopotamia occupied roles that blended the domestic, the economic, and in some cases, the religious. In modest households, a woman's day might begin with tending to the hearth. Grain, ground on heavy stone querns, was turned into bread, thick loaves baked in clay ovens. The scent of fresh bread and the earthy tang of fermented beer filled the air, both staples of the Mesopotamian diet. Wool, spun and woven, became garments for the family. Children, often numerous, were supervised as they played in courtyards or learned small tasks. The rhythm of women's labor was woven tightly into the rhythm of survival. In larger households, women might oversee servants or slaves, managing the distribution of food, clothing, and resources. Some women were involved in trade, selling textiles or surplus goods in markets. Legal documents from clay tablets show that women could own property, inherit wealth, and, in certain cases, manage businesses. While patriarchal norms define society, these records reveal that women were not entirely absent from the world of commerce or ownership. Marriage was the cornerstone of family life. Unions were often arranged, designed to bind families together or secure property. Dowries and contracts recorded the obligations of husband and wife, detailing the expectations of support, inheritance, and fidelity. Yet beyond the formalities, marriage anchored households, creating units of labor and care. Within these households, children were expected to support parents in old age, continuing the cycle of obligation and survival. For women of the priestly class, life took on a different shape. Some are dedicated to temples, serving as priestesses or caretakers of sacred rituals. Others, often daughters of nobility, were consecrated to deities, their roles blending devotion with social prestige. In these contexts, women wielded influence through spiritual authority, standing in spaces where the sacred touched the daily. Childbirth, though central to family continuity, was fraught with risk. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that women relied on midwives and rituals to safeguard mother and child. Amulets, prayers, and incantations were common, reflecting both practical and spiritual concerns. Survival was never guaranteed, and the fragility of life was deeply felt within family circles. The education of children varied by class. Sons of nobles or scribes might learn cuneiform writing, bending over clay tablets in temple schools, their lessons full of repetition and practice. Daughters, by contrast, were more often prepared for domestic life, though some learned skills in weaving, trade, or household management. The contrast between expectation and possibility defined childhood, shaping futures long before adulthood arrived. Within the walls of homes, family gatherings provided moments of rest. Meals were shared, stories told, songs sung. Children played with small toys, clay figurines, miniature carts, balls of bitumen, while elders recounted tales of ancestors and gods. These quiet moments bound families together, creating continuity in a world that could often feel uncertain. The legal codes of Mesopotamia, such as Hammurabi's, reveal the expectations placed on family life. They describe inheritance rights, responsibilities of children, protections for wives, and punishments for transgressions. Though written in formal, detached language, they remind us that households were the foundation upon which society rested. To regulate the home was to regulate the heart of Mesopotamian civilization. Despite the constraints of gender roles, glimpses of agency shine through. Women who managed estates, women who acted as witnesses in legal cases, women whose names survived on clay tablets, all remind us that the domestic sphere was not merely private, but deeply enmeshed in the fabric of community and economy. For the modern listener, drifting into calm reflection, these details of Mesopotamian family life evoke a world at once distant and familiar. The sound of grinding grain, the laughter of children in courtyards, the care of mothers, the guidance of fathers, these rhythms echo across time. They remind us that beyond the grandeur of kings and priests, history is sustained by the quiet persistence of households. As the mind softens toward sleep, one can imagine the glow of a small oil lamp in a clay house, flickering gently as a family drifts into slumber under the same stars we see today. When we step back and look at Mesopotamian society as a whole, one of the most striking features is the contrast between the lives of the few who held wealth, power, or sacred authority, and the many who worked to sustain them. This divide was not only economic but also cultural, reflected in clothing, food, housing, education, and even access to the gods themselves. The contrast formed the silent structure of daily life, an invisible boundary that shaped how people moved, worked, and dreamed. For the elite, life was marked by display. Nobles and royal families lived in expansive houses with central courtyards, decorated walls, and shaded colonnades. They wore robes woven from fine wool, embroidered with colors drawn from costly dyes. Jewelry of lapis lazuli, carnelian, and gold marked their status. Servants carried food to their tables, bread, beer, and meats served in abundance. They dined from vessels of bronze or precious stone, while music played softly from lyres and flutes. For them, the day was divided not by manual labor, but by administrative duties, ceremonies, and leisure. For the commoner, by contrast, homes were small, made of sun-dried mud brick, often crowded with extended families. Floors were hard-packed earth, and walls might crumble with age. Meals were simple: bread, onions, lentils, and occasionally fish or dates. Vessels were clay, plain and practical. Instead of music at meals, there was the sound of grinding grain, children crying, or neighbors' voices drifting through thin walls. The day was divided by toil in fields, workshops, or markets. Leisure was limited, found in festivals or moments of storytelling at night. Education further deepened the divide. While the sons of elites trained in scribal schools, pressing styluses into clay tablets and memorizing long lists of words, the children of farmers or artisans learned their parents' crafts through practice. One path led to literacy, administration, and influence. The other, to the slow repetition of manual skill. For most, the written word remained a mystery, the domain of a privileged few. Religion, too, reflected inequality. Temples were central to every city, and all citizens contributed offerings. But access to the sacred inner chambers, the spaces where statues of the gods were clothed and fed, belonged only to priests and the elite. Commoners might see the outer processions, hear the hymns, or glimpse the temple facade, but the inner sanctum remained hidden. The gods, like the rulers, were present yet distant, mediated through layers of privilege. Even death highlighted the contrast. Elites were buried in tombs stocked with goods, jewelry, vessels, sometimes entire feasting sets. Servants or retainers might even be sacrificed to accompany them, ensuring a retinue in the afterlife. Commoners, by contrast, were often buried beneath their homes or in simple graves, accompanied by little more than a jar of water or a small figurine. The journey beyond mirrored the divisions of life. And yet, despite these differences, the lives of elite and commoner were bound together. Without farmers, artisans, and laborers, the palaces could not stand and the temples could not function. Without nobles, priests, and administrators, the order of society would fracture. Each group, in its way, depended on the other, even if the balance of power was unequal. Festivals offered moments where these contrasts briefly softened. During New Year celebrations, processions carried statues of gods through city streets. Commoners and elites alike filled the roads, voices rising together in song. Food and drink were shared, music filled the air, and for a time the strict boundaries of class blurred into a collective celebration. These occasions remind us that Mesopotamian society, for all its divisions, also contained shared rhythms and communal bonds. Archaeology, too, reveals both sides of the story. Excavations at royal tombs uncover treasures of dazzling craftsmanship, golden cups, intricate jewelry, lyres inlaid with precious stones. Yet just beyond the palace walls, archaeologists also find rows of modest houses, fragments of clay toys, broken cooking pots, and worn grinding stones. Together, these artifacts speak of two worlds living side by side, one glittering, fragile, and preserved in legend, the other humble, steady, and essential, yet often silent in written records. For us, lying in the quiet of the present, these contrasts carry a curious calm. They remind us that human societies have always been layered, with privileges and hardships unevenly distributed. Yet within these layers, the ordinary and extraordinary coexisted, shaping a civilization that endured for centuries. The contrast itself became the foundation of order, the rhythm of nobles and priests at the top, and the steady labor of farmers and craftsmen below. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the city at dusk. In a noble courtyard, a lamp burns beside tablets of accounts, while servants clear away the remains of a feast. In a humble home nearby, a family gathers around a clay lamp, sharing bread before resting on reed mats. The same moon rises over both, casting the same light on palace and hut alike. Differences remain, yet beneath the stars, all lives share the same sky, the same uncertainty, and the same hope for another dawn. And so, we come to the quiet end of our journey through the strange secrets of Mesopotamian kings, their cities, their households, and their people. Over these past hours, we have wandered through bustling markets, stood in the shadows of ziggurats, followed kings into their campaigns, listened to priests reading omens in the night sky, and stepped softly into the lives of families both noble and humble. Each detail, from clay tablets to flickering oil lamps, has carried us deeper into a world that was at once distant and familiar, ancient, and yet somehow close at hand. The rhythm of Mesopotamian life was shaped by contrasts between rich and poor, sacred and ordinary, permanence and fragility. Kings ruled with authority, yet their power was fleeting. Priests read the stars, but the heavens remained beyond reach. Farmers and artisans worked tirelessly, yet their labor supported wonders that still astonish us today. And in every household, whether large or small, families sought comfort, continuity, and survival, much as we do now. For us, here in the present moment, the world feels calmer when placed beside these ancient struggles. Whatever burdens you carry, they are part of a long human story, one that stretches back thousands of years. As you rest, you might imagine the steady flow of the Euphrates, carrying with it fragments of forgotten voices, fragments of forgotten dreams. Those voices once filled streets and palaces, markets and fields. Tonight, they accompany you only as a gentle murmur, a soft echo guiding you towards sleep. If this kind of gentle storytelling brings you peace, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe to the channel, The Sleepy Historian. It helps others, too, to find calm in these quiet histories. And if you feel inclined, share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's something strangely comforting about knowing that others, in distant places and different time zones, are also falling asleep to the same steady rhythm of boring history. Let your eyes grow heavy now. Let her breathing slow. The kings and priests, the farmers and scribes, fade softly into the distance. Their world rests as you rest. Their lamps have long gone out, but tonight, your own light flickers gently, holding back the darkness just enough for you to feel safe, calm, and at ease. So rest well, sleep deeply, and may tomorrow find you with a mind restored, body refreshed, and heart at peace. Until next time, let the past keep watch over your dreams.